most importantly, our interview today is Christian Hacking, the Parliamentary Liaison Officer of the Centre for Bioethical Reform, cbruk.org, I think. Christian, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So, Christian, a very warm welcome.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, and I feel strangely warmed by Philip's furnace in the background.
I can actually turn up the heat a little bit.
Oh, very good. You've got the power.
I've got the power.
So, Philip, do you want to kick off with the first questions?
Yes. The first mine, and it might be quite interesting for everybody who is interested in the topic of abortion, because people come from different backgrounds, and I wanted to know, in regards to your campaigning and also the approach towards it, what do you think works best? And there he went.
Sorry, I'm opening the door in the vain hope that that will improve my internet signal.
Okay, brilliant. So what do you think works best in regards to campaigning? And that obviously can be a mix of these things. A scientific approach to abortion or life, an emotional approach, a human rights approach.
Well, it's a great question, and I think, as I sought to make clear in my presentation just now, you've got to combine all of them, which is facts alone, science alone doesn't always affect people's behaviors. You have to go for a kind of dual prong. You have to affect people's thinking and their heart. So with regard to science and emotion, that's why we've pioneered the use of graphic image abortion displays using scientifically verified images of unborn babies in the womb and also when they've been aborted, because you have to confront people both with the science, but also you have to affect their feelings as well. And that's a well-established history that, you know, the abolitionists of the slave trade used, the civil rights campaigners used, and is even used today with images on your smoking packets, comic relief, etc. People know that you've got to, it's not just the facts that matter, it's how the facts are framed. And maybe even the lady on the last call, you know, in messaging and marketing would concur that. With regard to the second 2 points of religion and human rights, I mean, really, this comes down to your authoritative basis for defining who is a human being and who you should kill and who you should be allowed to let live. So good era for this, but any science ultimately has to be pinned to a worldview or to a philosophy underneath it. And so the question is, what is your philosophy? I would argue that you can easily make a case for the abolition of abortion on human rights grounds because they're human beings. But then you've got the question of where do human rights come from? And so if you drill down, you end up inevitably touching on the subject of morality, which is, you know, who decides who's valuable and when they become valuable. And so, you know, for me, it's very hard to make that case without ultimately enlisting the help of God. And I believe that the Christian corpus, the Bible, has a far more compelling and hopeful and clear definition than any other world scriptural book. So yeah, I mean, so in summary, you know, you've got to make scientific and emotional arguments, and they've got to be hinged in some authority. The question is just how deep do you want to deeply you root them.
I'd like to come to Douglas, a question from Douglas, for which thank you, Douglas. It says, Christian, you're working on the basis that changing public opinion will change policy. There's the slave trade and many more recent examples of this, which of course you gave in your video. Why do you believe that policy will change given the influence of feminism over abortion and other areas?
Well, it's the same principle across the board. Whatever the issue is, you can't change public policy without changing public opinion, at least in a functioning democratic nation. Now, of course, you know, how functional, but but you have to persuade, you know, you can't infantilize the public. You need to persuade the members of the public that are adults and rational human beings, many of them far cleverer than yourself, that an issue is an issue. And I think that's fundamental to bringing about, you know, lasting societal change. And that's why, you know, there's no point, you know, so much of the feminism and that we see pushed is actually pushed by specialized lobby groups who are working within a very insular echo chambers, and they've been very influential in a very short space of time. But as we're finding out more and more, they don't actually have the backing of public opinion. If you put to members of the public some of the things that they're pushing for, you know, the public find it abhorrent or repulsive, repugnant, etc. Affects societal change, needs to connect the dots between, you know, they need to expose what's going on at the top, at the bottom. And I mean, this is a long and arduous process, but it is the best way to achieve long-term lasting results, and to really dignify the general populace, as opposed to just kind of, you know, making secret handshakes because you really think they're too stupid to know what's right and what's wrong and what's good for them and good for their families, etc.
Thank you very much. In the last years, opposition to abortion. Now that I'm pretty sure that's a little bit because I'm more in a bit of an echo chamber, or I hear more Christian voices, but also in the men's movement and men's rights movement, I have heard more men talking about it and talking about how abhorrent the murder of unborn children is. Why do you think that abortion is or has become a man's issues and a man's rights issue that is now being talked about, including here in this conference?
Well, it's a good question. I think the answer would be multifaceted. I think all injustices point, which is the injustice gets so great, and the number of people it's wounding becomes so so huge that it cannot help but break whatever barriers are being placed on it by the powers that be in the media, etc. And the reality is, since you know, the Abortion Act was introduced, you know, men really have no rights over what happens to their unborn babies, which are 50% their genetics, just as they are 50% the mother's genetics. And this has left a steady stream. I mean, if we're talking 10 million abortions, that ultimately means there. Now, some of them abdicated their role and didn't support that partner in that decision. Others would have campaigned to keep that child and rear that child, but the partner either aborted behind their back or aborted and then claimed it was a miscarriage, etc. So there's a steady stream of men who have been deprived children because of the abortion industry, and this is because the system is designed and is expedient to get women to have an abortion, and isn't designed to actually support them or help them support them in making actual choice about what they do. And as I explained, you know, the babies are being euphemized. So in regard to why it's a men's issue, I mean, twofold. One is because it's just been creating this ginormous wound over the last 50 years that it's getting harder and harder to conceal. But secondly, just the truth of it. It's a men's issue because these are human beings, and as men, we should be compelled by truth, and we should seek to defend innocent human beings. And I think with the introduction of ultrasound scans, and, you know, even with IVF, which we won't get into today, you know, it's, you know, this schizophrenia between, is it an unborn child or is it just a clump of cells, termination of a pregnancy, etc. You know, this cognitive dissonance, these two truths that we hold simultaneously, I think that they can no longer, you know, that we're basically on the brink of a mental breakdown on the issue. So I think men are cottoning on that if it's a human being, perspective of whether they're male or female, obviously 50% we know are male. So I think kind of a mixture of just the wound it's causing and the fact that truth ultimately can never be suppressed forever is forcing men to confront this issue in a new way. And I think the States is a good example because they're obviously a million miles ahead of us on this. But I think that we've got some catching up to do. But I think people are starting to cotton on that this is something we have to address if we're going to be.
Yeah, thank you. I find it interesting that the men's movement, even though children are very often used against fathers to get money out of them, and at the moment there's a huge power play where the woman holds all the power and the man is pretty much at the whims of woman, and still it is the man's movement is in favor of life and are against abortion, which I find really interesting and shows that put themselves into potential harm's way rather than seeing others being hurt just because it might benefit them, which I'm very proud that our side is still, I would say, standing up for what's right, even though it might actually hurt us in some ways. I would like to hear Mike's view on that just real quick before I move on to the next question.
No, I think that's right. There has been a sort of a growing undercurrent, and it's only really, I think, in the last couple of years that the men's movement, or most MRAs, I'd say, have really thought about the issues and have come, I think, fairly inevitably to a pro-life position. It's been fascinating. I think I was the first person to present abortion as a men's rights issue in Chicago at the Chicago conference 2 years ago, where I know you were there, Philip. And I expected a bit of a backlash from MRAs saying, this is not a men's issue, this is a woman's issue. We have enough men's issues. What the hell are you doing? But I had nothing but support for a pro-life position. And yes, I'd like to move on to a very interesting question from Steve Moxon, the writer of an absolutely astonishing book in 2008, which I can credit with red pilling me. I think it really was a book ahead of its time. So Steve asks this: it's often asked, what is the linchpin of feminism and identity politics that can be targeted to bring the whole thing down? I've always thought it's the domestic violence issue, the overwhelming preponderance of female perpetrated partner violence, giving the lie to the obscenely false standard narrative. Though I wonder if it might be the total falsity of the notion of misogyny, the reality being philology and misandry. You never get short questions from Steve Moxon, I'm afraid, Christian. But some would argue that rather than the domestic violence issue, the linchpin might be the abortion issue. That's a fascinating question, and I think he could be right.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur. I think the abortion issue is a litmus test or a very apt case study for multiple issues within of the feminist debate. Not only just establishing the facts, that it's not part of the woman's body; it's a separate, unique genetic, individual. Not only is it, of course, it doesn't have anything to do with men. I mean, there's just a number of logical fallacies in the way that the argument is propped up. And these logical fallacies lead to a gross act of violence against an innocent human being. So it really epitomizes the worst of feminism and the quest for power at the expense of the most innocent. And what was it? It was something like exported oppression or deferred oppression, which is, instead of the female class being oppressed, they are actually oppressing through the worst measures possible, through the poisoning, crushing, ejecting, flushing away their own offspring, and then proclaiming it as being not only a necessity, but actually, if you read Anne Farady's book, The Moral Case for Abortion, she seeks to reclaim the moral ground to suggest that it's actually a moral good. This, so I mean, yeah, I think if you sort out the abortion issue, I hope that a number of other issues would actually go would straighten out as well. And even just as a starting point, and I'm very pleased that you have it as number one on your issue, is it, you know, your one's trajectory, you know, the place at which you launch the boat, you know, the angle at which you launch a boat has quite a big, you know, say on where the boat ends up, right? So then if we're not thinking clearly on the abortion issue and fundamental life issues, what is a human being and are they worthy of protection, etc., and if we continue to perpetuate these ludicrous notions of, you know, it becomes an unborn baby when it's viable, or it becomes a human when it's born, or whatever these things are that make no logical sense, we're only going to get off to a bad step in all of our thinking moving forward.
It's probably worth saying, I'm sorry, Philip, just very, very quickly before you
Sure.
It's probably worth explaining, Christian, maybe I should have before, that the reason abortion is the number one issue out of the 25 is the list is broadly chronological. So it's the first time that it, you know, so that's the sole reason. But certainly for my own party, when we relaunch as a pro-family and pro-children's party, then it'll be right up there at the front of issues. So Philip.
Yeah, obviously to create change and to take down this toxic feminist, well, the toxic feminist machine that I would say attacks families, attacks unborn life, we need a movement, or we need to see a willingness of people to actually fight for unborn life. And we have recently seen in the US that the High Court, I think it's the High Court, they are looking into overturning Roe v. Wade. Maybe you could explain what Roe v. Wade means, and how likely do you think it will be overturned, and what effect will that have on Europe, in your opinion?
Yeah, so a bit of background. So Roe v. Wade is the seminal court case in the States, in the Supreme Court, that legalized abortion across the whole of the United States in 1973. The main protagonist in this was a lady whose name was meant to be Jane Roe. It wasn't actually her real name. It was alleged that she'd been raped and fallen pregnant, although the fact of the matter is she wasn't raped and she wasn't even pregnant. So she was a pawn in a big agenda to legalize abortion in the States, and that has led to countless millions of unborn babies being killed in the United States. And yes, with the kind of with the reshuffle of High Court judges and the introduction of two, in likely that Roe v. Wade will be overturned in the States over the coming years. I mean, or if that's put too strongly, then it's got the highest chance it has ever had of being overturned in this time. Although no doubt Biden et al. And what's her name, that lady underneath him,
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris will work hard to generate new legislation after that, or state by state legislation. So it'll be but it's hugely significant, because another fallacy of the pro-abortion argument is that when you make abortions illegal, they just go underground. Now, it's true that if abortion is made illegal, then of course people will do abortions illegally. But in the same way that if we make burglary legal, you know, burglary will increase, right? So criminalizing something actually always decreases numbers. Take COVID, for example. You know, you pass ludicrous laws and people follow them. You know, it's just that people generally obey the law, whatever the law is. So So I think America are really trailblazing in this regard, and I think the way that they're being presented in the media is incredibly disingenuous, because they're basically being presented like a dictatorship that is changing laws without any public opinion. Arguably, America is even more democratic than us. So in order for them to have generated the legislation and the battle that they are now fighting, they have actually engaged in a huge, and they have the members of the public on side. They've done what I first talked about, which is they've changed public opinion, and now they're changing public policy. And it's important that we don't overlook that. You know, these are not people sneaking into the legislature and kind of changing laws overnight that nobody wants. This is a real campaign that has really humanized the unborn baby in the States, and surprise, surprise, public policy is changing with it.
And am I correct to say that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that does not make abortion illegal in the whole of the United States, but it gives states the right to make, correct? Or
yes, I think that's right. So it lifts the blanket approval of abortion across states. So it will allow states to make their own laws on the matter. I do believe that's correct. I'm not a specialist in American law or politics, so please do double check this stuff.
Okay, now could you tie this, and then we gonna go into one of the attendees' questions. Could you tell me what your thoughts, how this might affect us, how it might affect the UK and Europe? By the way, somebody in the chat that the YouTuber Steven Crowder, one of the most famous American conservative commentators, that he did some great YouTube videos called "I'm Pro-Life, Change My Mind," where he invites feminists or pro-abortion people to change his mind. And I just wanted to share that. So, Christian.
Well, sorry. I mean, it links very well the person's comment, which is the main lesson we can learn from what's going on in the States is you can change people's attitude towards abortion. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not fixed. When the public are given the facts, they can change their mind. And so the first thing it should do is just give us hope that laws and this kind of killing and flushing of babies down the loo that we've grown all too common to in the United Kingdom, and the defiling effect that's having on us as a society, it doesn't have to go on forever. It can change, and it can change in a relatively short period of time. So I think that's and if we're to follow on from the gentleman's comments, you know, a huge part of that is to say, you know, I'm pro-life, try to change my mind. It's to engage in the public debate on it and show people that they are sitting on dust and ashes, that their arguments don't work at all. I mean, case in point, you know, last Saturday, we were doing one of our public educational displays with CBR UK in London, on London Bridge, right? And I spoke to this lovely lady with this blue and purple hair. And I said to her, "What do you think about abortion?" She said, "Well, you know, it's a woman's right. I support it." I said, "Do you support it under all circumstances?" She's like, "No, not once they're born." I said, "You know, what happens when they're born? Do they change, you know, from a non-entity to an entity?" She goes, no, they are humans before they're born. I said, "Well, when do they become humans?" And then we got out some images of what abortion looked like. She said, "Okay, they are human, but, you know, it's important sometimes if a child is going to be born into a horrendous circumstance, then sometimes it's the most compassionate thing to do to abort them." I said, "What, kill them in the womb?" She goes, "Yes, yeah, I mean, that's the most compassionate thing." And I said to her, "Okay, well, thank you for being so honest. Can you think of any examples from history where people have killed other human beings thinking that it was compassionate?" She scratched her chin for a moment and said, "Yes, I can." I said, "Are those positive examples?" And she goes, "No, they're not." And I said, "Well, forward to me, it was exactly the same argument that underpinned the T4 euthanasia program in Germany during the Nazi regime, you know." And I said, "I hate to bring up, you know, Hitler, etc., but that is the same ideological argument." And she goes, "Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. You know, and she goes, thanks, I never really thought about it that way. And then she continued with her day. But this is the point. It's helping people to understand that, you know, whilst they're going about their Christmas shopping, they may well be harboring, you know, Nazi ideas. You know, and we all are in different areas of our lives. And that's why we need our minds to be transformed and renewed, you know, through challenge and conversation and, you know, unjudgmental back and forth, etc. And so that's why, you know, my call to everyone on listening to this or watching this after this is to start engaging in that debate. And actually the best place for that debate to happen is in person on the streets with individuals, and CBR UK have plenty of opportunities for people to do that, and we can train you up and we can help you, and we can, you know, you can start a public educational display where you live. But really it's helping the rewiring the population and booting out, stripping back and destroying all the euphemisms that perpetuate this injustice.
Thank you.
Yes, healthcare services is my particular bugbear. Reproductive healthcare. Okay, this question
sorry, to even further, abortion is a euphemism. Even the very phrase abortion is a euphemism, and which we swallow up left, right, and center. You know, you abort a mission, you abort abstract things. You don't abort human beings. You never have. So it's like, you know, it's using correct terminology is essential, is an essential start to how we address this.
I agree. And can I just say for the attendees, I'm seeing a little bit of screen freezing. I don't know if that's my internet connection or if it's yours, Christian, or Philip, but I'll press on. Men have historically been the defenders of the weak and vulnerable, except when the weak and vulnerable are harmed or killed by women. So we have abortion, obviously, but also fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which impacts 1 in every 6 children born today. I made the point in my conference presentation that in the year 2020, according to the World Health Organization, there were 73+ million abortions worldwide. To put it into context, the most lethal war in human history was World War II. And in that, 70 million died in the space of, what, 6 years. The sheer scale of this genocide, because that's what it is. There's a word beyond genocide. I'm not quite sure what that is, but that would apply to abortion in my book. It was great campaigning with you outside the Tory party conference a month or 2 ago. And one of the things that struck me among your supporters was that possibly a small majority of them were of the female persuasion. And I wonder whether they face a particular backlash from feminists and other women, because I mean, essentially they are saying that women have rights. I hate to use that term here, but women have a right which they would want them not to have, and that's quite a difficult circle to sort out, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we have multiple female educators. Actually, probably the majority of the people who come out onto the streets with us are female, at least certainly reflecting on the teams I run in London. And yeah, we occasionally get a lady who comes up to them and censoriously says, you know, what are you doing here? You know, you shouldn't be here. What have they done to you? How have they brainwashed you into doing this kind of thing? But these women, just like you know, they're just thinking straight on the issue. They understand that abortion kills an innocent human being, and they understand that it harms women. And so they often, if the feminist in question is willing to listen to their side, they gently and compassionately explain this. And on many occasions we've had people do a 180, you know, who have started up furious and fired up about this issue, but they have been won over.
They will very often, Christian, I suspect, not have heard the arguments, will they?
No, and that's one of the main things, is people are not hearing the arguments, and everything that they're being told on this issue is misleading, because abortion is readily accepted as a solution to complex human problems. But anyone who gives it half a day's research realizes it only makes complex human problems a lot worse. So yeah, I mean, we get that, we get that, but often, you know, you know, the folly of the feminist arguments or the modern feminist arguments, you know, is often exposed in quite profound ways when we go on the streets, because people just come to us and it just comes out, and you just say,
yes,
this is what you're saying.
I recall that there was a Freshers' Week, I think 2 or 3 months ago, where there was a pro-life stall run by students, obviously, and the feminists basically sort of dismantled it very aggressively, I believe. And the Freshers, the room was only opened again once the authorities, once the authorities gave an assurance that the stand would not be put up again. I mean, that's the extent of the fear that feminists induce.
Yeah. Question, could I read one of the questions from our attendees? His name is Sean. I assume you're pronounced Sean. His question is, I have a book which is liked by Jess Phillips, MP Jess Phillips, called What Would Boudica Do? In a chapter about Mary Stopes, he read, I quote, a recent study showed 44% of pregnancies were unintended. Many feminists consider the ability to decide whether to undertake them as the single most liberating thing to have happened to women in history. End quote. Would you like to comment on that? Christian, you're muted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I am unwilling to take moral lessons from Jess Phillips or Boudica as moral examples for anything. But yeah, I mean, again, it's ideologically charged nonsense that abortion kills innocent human beings and abortion harms women. And the fact that you've got these hardy feminist advocates who some of them killed their babies and turned up to work the next day doesn't change the colossal human suffering that abortion is causing. And yes, they can whip out their industrial statistics to back up their claims, but it's all a great big love-in between policymakers and the abortion industry that needs to be exposed and confronted. And we've started that work. I mean, a recent FOI survey of 83 UK hospitals revealed that 1 in 17 women taking abortion pills at home end up receiving emergency hospital treatment as a result. You know, so this huge irony, right, that over lockdown, these measures were introduced to keep women away from hospitals, at least that was so it was claimed, ended up with 1 in 17 women having to go to hospital in the middle of the day or night to receive emergency treatment because they were either bleeding too much or experiencing pain, or the unborn baby or the pregnancy tissue hadn't fully come out. So, you know, it's all ideologically charged nonsense that quickly falls apart if it's scrutinized, and that's why, you know, we mustn't be afraid of the feminist things. We just got to scrutinize it. You know, this is not a gender specific issue. You know, this is a human issue, and it all needs to be scrutinized and dismantled and challenged. And those people who are going to push for it in the face of the facts, you know, they ultimately, once public opinion changes, they should either be removed or they should be tried. You know, because they're harming people.
There is a question from Douglas, which ties in quite nicely in regards to, because in the last question they said, oh, it's one of the most important women's rights. And in some ways, I can understand that the control over your abortion is taking control over your decisions in some ways. And I'm not justifying it at all. But here's a question from Douglas. In the USA, Human Coalition recently amended their mission, quote, to make abortion unthinkable and unnecessary, end quote. You are working to the unthinkable part, moving the zeitgeist to be anti-abortion. Are you doing anything to help women so that they do not find abortion necessary?
Yes, the short answer is CBR UK is run something called Hope Pregnancies. We're hoping to launch a bus in the new year that will be starting. It will be running its pilot in the East Anglia in England, but basically offering the counsel and support that women need who may be experiencing an unintended pregnancy. And there are numerous examples of this in the UK as well. Independent of us, the Crisis Pregnancy Helpline. There's a wonderful organisation in central London in Marylebone named the Good Counsel Network, who not only minister to ladies outside of abortion clinics, but end up supporting them for months, if not years, after they've given birth, either with rent or childcare or equipment issues. So the reality is the support in the UK is there, it exists, but sometimes, and this is not uncommon, you know, a woman can be offered all the support in the world to keep their child, for financial support, etc., and she can still go for an abortion because the whole way that apparatus is set up is abortion is not seen as morally wrong, because it's not seen as killing a human being. It's set up to be just another surgical procedure, like the removing of your tonsils or your appendix or having a bunion remover, all examples that have been used in the past. So whilst the support does exist, and of course there could be more, the first thing that needs to be broken is the euphemisms and the false notion that society has about what abortion is. Because as that happens, then obviously, you know, more support can be generated to raise up to fix it. And I mean, another huge thing that needs to happen is just, you know, someone needs to get a carving knife, you know, a hot knife through butter, and just sort out the NHS website, which is it an unborn baby, you know, or is it a clump of cells, you know, because depending on which page you're on, you get a different answer to this request. And I think this needs to be totally straightened out. Another huge thing that needs to be straightened out is informed consent. You know, women are currently being told that there's only a 1% chance that the abortion is going to fail or be unsuccessful, when we know actually it's a 6% chance. You know, so women are being lied to systematically, and so there's just so much stuff that needs to be done and changed, and yet another reason why we need all the support we can get, and people to contribute some of their time in fighting the multiple injustices that this party is seeking to address, specifically on this issue.
There is a question from Steve Moxon, which ties in well into the argument of the lump of cells and viability. Mike, would you like to read it?
Yes, just a moment. Yes, and I wonder if, Philip, if you could ask Douglas's question after that. So Steve Moxon says, so what about the issue of viability? It seems it is a valid demarcation to pick the point before which a fetus cannot survive, even with intensive care levels of medical assistance. If this were conceded, then there would be scope for some sort of accommodation between the two contrasting hitherto irreconcilable moral stances of pro-life and pro-choice, albeit with the latter the weaker by far, and so hardly should be calling the shots. Just any thoughts on that, Christian?
Yes, viability, whilst it's an observable feature of an unborn baby, if they, you know, unborn babies can survive with little assistance, you know, once born at around 30, 34 weeks. If you go further back to 28 weeks, 24 weeks, they can survive with a large amount of assistance, and surviving at 22 weeks with only so I think it's 3 out of 10 babies born at 22 weeks now survive, with only 1/3 of those having severe disability following that. So the viability kind of threshold is coming down and down and down as technology increases. But there's the more fundamental question here, which is, does a human's ability to be viable in an environment make them a human being worthy of legal protection? You know, a human being is not viable if it hops out of, you know, Elon Musk's, you know, SpaceX rockets, right? It doesn't change its humanity. We're not viable when we go swimming if we remain underwater too long. But our humanity is not suspended every time we dip beneath the water doing breaststroke up and down the pool. So you've got to have the viability argument brought in 1967 was a purely pragmatic and arbitrary line placed in the ground according to the technological means of the time. It's not a strong basis at all for defining what's a human being and whether they should be legally protected. And indeed, the way it is actually implemented today is only intervene in a baby's life if it's past a certain threshold. So I can tell you stories of babies that have been born at 24 weeks and 3 days, as opposed to 24 weeks and 6 days, and they've been left to die, with medical personnel refusing to offer any assistance towards them, just left on the side because that hospital threshold is 23 weeks and 6 days, or whatever the threshold is, and it changes depending on the hospital. Now, the issue being, in medicine, the basic medical ethics are to cause no harm. Even if a doctor was to come in and to gently attempt some resus or to put in a drip, the parents would have at least been comforted that the doctors were trying to do something, even if it's a futile experiment. But the fact that, that medical staff are refusing to do anything because by an arbitrary standard it's defined as not a human entity is appalling, and is doing no end of trauma to individuals. So this is why the heartbeat bill, although not perfect because a human being is, it comes into creation at fertilization, is a much better solution in establishing whether it's a human being or not, over viability.
Thank you very much. The last question at the like from the attendees, and then afterwards I would like to ask you something, because I went on Twitter and I found something interesting that I would like to share. But the last question from attendees comes from Douglas. He wrote, "Some men feel that it is a man's rights issue to allow for an abortion. Mike and I feel much the same on this, but what is your answer to those men who want their man's rights to allow for abortion and not be strapped into the financial support?" So the question is, when a baby is born, obviously men have to pay financial support. So when the woman has an abortion, they don't have to pay, which people might see as a right.
Well, it's another example of total schizophrenia, right? On the one hand, if a baby is born, then the law kicks in and it's expected that the father contribute towards the upbringing and care of that child. Yet moments before it is born, that child is unable to be killed. It just makes no sense at all. And any man who wants to kill an innocent human being to lessen a financial demand on his life, is not a kind of full man, in my personal opinion, because killing of the innocent should never be a solution to complex human problems. And if a man really can't afford to rear that child, then that man should be making provisions in other ways in order to ensure that child is cared for in the long term. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a crazy argument, but it also goes the other way, which is, some feminists are insisting that, men should be able to, you should be forced, under, strict and harsh legal measures to pay for children that they may not even have proper contact with. Yet simultaneously, that the women are also demanding that they should have a right to kill that child whenever they want during the 9 months of pregnancy. So how they can hold that over a man and then expect the man to cough up over the lifetime of that child is, again, is another gross injustice. That all of this stuff needs to be straightened out with clear thinking and clear laws based on fundamental scientific and principles, which is currently not happening because of the toxicity of this whole debate.
In my opinion, what we don't need less accountability for men. I think we need more accountability for women and more rights for men in regards to actually having contact to the children. I think that for me, children's rights are in some ways more important than women's or men's rights. And I think that children have the right to a father and a mother. and they have the right to be alive.
Yeah, I'd just say pretty well in every area where women have rights that men don't, MRAs would be in favor of men getting those rights. But it's certainly for me, and I guess and for Philip and you, Christian, this is an exception, because women shouldn't have the right to kill the innocent. So why would I want men to have the same right?
Yeah.
You'll be very well aware of this, Christian. 99% of abortions carried out of the over 10 million now since 1967 have been under absolutely totally spurious grounds. So 99% of them have been done to protect the mental health of women. There has not been in the 54 years is it now since then, as far as I know, any evidence that it does that. And in my own presentation, I pointed to evidence that electing to have an abortion does impact on the mental health of women. And how could it not? I mean, women would have not be human. But you mentioned something that one of the very interesting things on your website is you talk about, and in your videos, you talk about how the unborn child is not the only victim. And I think MRAs would say, well, there's both the mother and the putative mother and father. But I wonder if you could say something about women as victims, because to my mind, that's part of the battle, isn't it, in selling a pro-life position to women.
Yeah, so very simple. I mean, women are being deceived in their hundreds of thousands every year by the abortion industry, but what they're being told about what the abortion will be, how it will be performed, and the long-term consequences of that decision. And there's a huge amount of research out there suggesting, the links between abortion and ongoing substance abuse, depression, suicidal thoughts, regret. One study found that a woman is 6 times more likely to die a year after their abortion through either one of those, or a car accident, or domestic abuse, etc. So this idea that abortion empowers women, I think it does the absolute opposite most of the time. I think it disempowers them, and it makes them more vulnerable to harm in other areas of their life. There's also the long contested issue of abortion and breast cancer that the abortion industry are totally in denial about. Whereas, I could share a link. I'll share a link on the articles page on the conference of a review of international, I think it's about 65 papers showing that there is a causal link between abortion and breast cancer.
I wasn't aware of that.
And then you've also got the established link between abortion and future preterm delivery, which is women who some women can't get pregnant after their abortion, although the abortion industry deny any link between abortion and infertility. But you've got babies being born before their due date afterwards, which can also affect the health of future babies, and obviously places trauma on the mum. So all of this stuff is just a total mess, and then we've got the abortions over lockdown. And one abortion survivor over lockdown called Kirsty, she says this, and I quote, "My home used to be my happy, safe place, but now it's the place that took the life of my child." And so this whole notion that, is in the best interest of women. It's not. It's totally in the best interest of the abortion industry, that are perfectly willing to subcontract their duties and their supposed medical care to untrained women that they expect to now do the grisly work for them. It's a mess, and women are being lied to wholesale, and this is why we should not be afraid to debate women on this issue, because actually, if they give us enough of an audience with them, then we can easily persuade them that actually, we are on their side, that we think that this is not in their best interests. And I think for more people to do that, I think as we do, I think we'll see more women actually trusting us, and we'll see more women throwing off, the modern shackles of the feminist movement to realize that actually they're being sold a lie across the board.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up here. I just wanted to read out something real quick. because when I watched your video for ICMI, I typed in your organization into Twitter and I tried to find you. And the second thing I found was a tweet from somebody, and I would like to read it out. I find that very interesting. From a guy called Rory McLean. And he writes, he has a photo of one of your leaflets, and he writes, the attacks on Stonewall, which is an LGBT organization, the attacks on Stonewall aren't happening in isolation. Today, I was handed this leaflet walking through Durham. A group of 7 people, all men with graphics abortion photos around their necks, were handing them out. I looked into the organization behind them and wow. So the reason I wanted to read that out was because, so I'm same-sex attracted, even though I don't live it. I choose a heterosexual lifestyle. But I saw that on the forefront of the abortion debate are lesbians, very, very often, not always, but very often. And I answered to this guy, oh yeah, the people most affected by abortion are gay men and lesbians, which obviously is a joke because they are not affected by it. What I find really interesting is that it all works together. The LGBT community and the feminist community, they work in the same direction, even though the topics are not related to them at all in some ways. You only have 2 minutes left to answer to that.
Well, regardless as to what you think about homosexuality, you know, the LGBT trans debate, ultimately, these are things that you do to yourself. Whereas abortion is fundamentally different because it's something that you do to another person, right? So if you seek to you know, lop off a part of your body in order to become a woman, you know, that's something you're doing. You're harming yourself, but you're not harming anybody else, physically speaking. Abortion is very different because abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human being, and so I think we need to take these debates to them. Lots of these people are not, you know, they're mixed up ideologically, and they think that total power to redefine the biological world will somehow make them happy, and indeed the total power to kill one's offspring will somehow empower them and make them happy. The reality is, we know that to do all these things, ultimately, it's like putting your hands in a plug socket. It's to play God, and the long-term effects of that on mortal flesh, which can't handle that responsibility, are diabolical. And so my recommendation to anyone who is in that position across the debate in the abortion issue or not is to be grounded. You know, people are walking around like highly charged, highly charged objects that need to be grounded in authority that is bigger and better than them. And my solution to that is the Christian God. But there's other people who can find other ways to ground themselves without doing that. But yeah, I mean, what's going on in Durham is brilliant because a group of about 6 people are triggering a citywide conversation on abortion, and they're not going to stop, and they're not limited by you know, the rules that are going on campus, because they're engaging in the public square amongst residents, and they'll continue to do so.
No, Krishna, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid. Philip, thank you for that fascinating last question and for everything. Absolutely, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I could carry this on for hours. It's such an extraordinary topic, and I think it will become the flagship thing for the men's rights movement. Anyway, I have to end it there. Thank you both very much, and we'll post this within the next 24 hours.
Attendees, thank you for watching and the questions.